I'm Jameson Dean, and I'm here with Matthew Boyce of Zero Digital, and we're here to talk about the Nikon D4 and the Canon 1DX. We do actually have both cameras in our hands, and we've actually had the chance to do a little bit of a head-to-head comparison. The reason we have both is basically Matthew is a well-regarded wedding photographer in the Toronto area. Tell them a little bit about yourself, Matt.
So I've been shooting for over 10 years now with Zero Digital company here, and I've been a Nikon shooter for the last, since I had the Fuji S2 was my first digital camera. Before that I had a Nikon film camera and started shooting digital with the Fuji S2, which was a Nikon mount camera, and moved on from there to D200 and then into the D3. D3S, and I just bought this D4 a few months back, and the camera's a good camera, but the screen was just driving me nuts on the back. It has a green tinge to it, and getting your white balance I was finding it really difficult. It was just driving me nuts. So I had the opportunity to buy this Canon here, this 1DX, and I decided, you know what, I've heard it's a great camera. Bought it, and then we're putting it to a head comparison, and then seeing at the end of it which camera system I'm going to go to. So I am risking switching everything over and jumping ship to Canon after shooting, many years Nikon shooter and loving Nikon.
And actually, in a little bit of a contrast to that, I have always been a Canon shooter. Matt and I have been shooting alongside each other for the better half of a decade. Matt has been shooting Nikon since the beginning. I've been shooting Canon since the beginning, the days of the 20D, 30D, all the way through 5D Mark II, 1D Mark IV. In contrast to Matt, who is now on the fence of switching from Nikon to Canon, I was actually about a year ago, and I know we talked about this an awful lot, on the fence, ready to dump all my Canon gear when I had the 1D Mark IV, and really wanted to go to Nikon. And I think Nikon really had the upper hands for those past few years. That was mid-2011. Something told me maybe I should hold off and see what the next round of cameras offers. So here we are with the next round of cameras. And we've had a bit of a chance to actually take these for head-to-head tests. So starting with, I guess, the high ISO studio scene. What we did was we set up a bunch of objects, different little colored objects, an album, and we ran through ISOs 800 to ISO, the very top, which is 200,000 ISO. And I just want to talk a little bit about what we discovered there. Exact same scene shot with both cameras, 70 to 200s on there. How did you find the results?
We found the results to be very similar. We had expected the Canon from previous reports online in different forums saying it was going to be, maybe a 1/3 to 2/3 of a stop better than the D4. When we got them head to head, we noticed, if anything, slight of an advantage to Nikon. If anything, it was very similar. Not one to go either way based on that conclusion. There might have been a little bit more detail in the Canon, and in the highlights there was definitely less noise in the Nikon. In the darkers, the Canons were a little bit better, I would say, but all in all, very similar.
Yeah, I think when we went through the entire ISO range, we just saw that one thing was consistent. The Nikon D4 it seemed exposed consistently about a third to 2/3 of a stop brighter than the Canon. So we're shooting raw, we brought the files into the Lightroom, exact same settings, the conditions were the same, and consistently the Nikon D4 was about, like I said, about between a third to 2/3 of a stop brighter. And that right there kind of throws things off a little bit, but I think you have to take into account that exposure difference. That's how we shoot. If something needs a little more or a little less exposure, we're going to make that adjustment, and that all counts in terms of overall image noise. I also noticed that when we equalized the sharpness, in other words, dropped the sharpness, equalized the exposure between the two, output both at the same, I did an output at 12 megapixel, we get a lot closer. I'm still going to give the Nikon D4 a 1/3 stop edge over the Canon 1DX in terms of noise performance overall. Having said that, I think there's something about the color and contrast between the two where no matter what, every time you end up looking at the entire scene, it almost looks like the Canon seemed to get things, and this was maybe my opinion, but it seemed to get things just a little bit.
No, I agreed as well. I thought the contrast and everything in the image seemed to be an overall more pleasing image when you would look at the Canon versus the Nikon. Even though the noise might have been a fraction a little bit less with the Nikon, the overall image would be a more pleasing image with the Canon.
I'm going to say point Nikon in terms of the high ISO noise. I'm going to give it a half point.
But for that result right there,
There's not enough.
Wouldn't jump ships for that at all. If anything, would stick with the Nikon for that one.
Next, we wanted to test the low light autofocus performance. So what we did at that point, we basically found a target in one of the dark corridors of the office here, stood side by side and even traded cameras to make sure we had a fair chance. As the scene got continuously darker, what did we discover?
We discovered that the Nikon was able to grab focus in very, very low light situations and take a shot in focus, where the Canon was bobbing in and out and couldn't seem to grab the focus. So at a certain point, the Canon stopped and the Nikon surpassed that. Now, it was extremely low light situations. I'm not sure how often you'd be trying to, but it did outperform in that aspect.
Yeah. Well, we're wedding photographers. This is a situation we come in all the time. Sometimes we're doing candlelit receptions. We don't want to have our AF assist beam flashing on, the wedding patrons. At the same time, we do want to be able to get in focus shots. I think for the most part, in any reasonable light, they're both really close, even what you'd consider low light. But as we started drawing the blinds and lowering the low light levels, where the Canon fell off, the 1DX fell off, and it was pretty much futile. You're not going to get an image. It's refusing to focus. The Nikon gave it that last college try, and a lot of the time was actually able to get that shot.
Yeah,
that's a big point for Nikon, I would say.
Big point for Nikon.
I am going to say Canon's come an awful long way with low light autofocus performance. The 1DX, to me, is just night and day difference in that regard compared to the 1D Mark IV. I really had an awful time with the 1D Mark IV in low light, and I think the 1DX it's come miles. It still can't touch the D4 in terms of being able to get that lock in extremely low light conditions.
For test number 3, we headed out onto the studio rooftop patio here at Zero Digital, and we had tried to see how fast with the 70 to 200s we could focus between a fence beam and a building with a crane on it in the background in the Toronto skyline.
So it's kind of a near to far, how fast?
Back and forth. We started off with the Nikon, and I was focusing back and forth. Jay was focusing with the Canon, focusing back and forth, and he's like, "Oh, which one's faster?" I said, "Well, the way to test this is instead of counting it, let me try the Canon, you try the Nikon." I started trying the Canon. There was a big difference. The Canon in this smoked the Nikon here. It wasn't a point. It was a huge point. It was 2 to 3 times faster, focusing back and forth, which was quite shocking. Actually, that it could drive the motors in the lens that fast to focus back and forth.
It felt like a different class of camera.
Oh, it felt like a different class of camera in that test for sure. So when it comes to focusing at a fast speed back and forth, by far the Canon outperformed the Nikon without a shadow of a doubt here.
Our next test, we decided to check for autofocus consistency using faster lenses. In other words, wide open apertures, 1.4. Obviously, there's no 1.2 for the Nikon. I don't know if that's a point or not, but prime lenses just like the 85s here, and the 70 to 200s as well. Since we shoot people an awful lot, it's always important. How often do you shoot wide open
Quite often with my lenses.
Same here. That's something, I don't buy 1.2 glass to stop it down. What did you find overall?
Well, we found, what was it? With this test, we had found that both were hitting focus quite well.
Yeah.
We found with the 85s at 1.4, the Nikon was maybe more consistent with hitting focus, but we had noticed with the Canon, out of about 12 images shot, it missed about 3, but the other 9 were more on than any one of the Nikons. So it just seemed that when you hit it with the Canon, it was, wow, you're really hitting it, and this is a sharp, sharp image. With the Nikon, we saw, even though it was sharp and you could work with that image no problem, it wasn't having the detail and the sharpness of the Canon. More consistently out of those 12 images, it did hit every single one, where maybe 3 of the Canons may not have compared to the Nikon overall, but the other 9 were bang on and so sharp.
What would you call in the end?
In the end, I would choose towards the Canon on this one, just because I do take multiple shots normally of when I'm shooting, portraits and such. So, I would lean towards the Canon on that one rather than the Nikon on this test. Even though it was a little bit more consistent, it was consistently not as great, if you know what I mean.
Exactly. I think this one was hit with a couple of misses in there, but when it did hit, it was really impressive. So I'd rather take, I think, the results I saw from the 1DX there. Yeah. Okay, so the next test we did was we decided to check out the highlights. In other words, something that's important to a wedding photographer is being able to see how much highlight headroom you have in a raw image. In other words, if you're slightly exposed or you have a high contrast scene and you want to, if you get some clipping in the white dress or in some of the skin tones, it happens even to the best of us. And the ability to bring those highlights down and recover them and get detail back into the shot. We overexposed the shot by, I think it was about 3 stops.
Yeah. And both did amazing, bringing it back down.
Yeah, no issues.
There were no issues on either. If I had to say, I noticed maybe on the tops of my foreheads with the shot, maybe the Nikon was slightest bit better. Possibly slightest bit better, but they were both acceptable, both great. You couldn't complain. When we started pumping up dark images the other way around, that's where we noticed that the Nikon did have an advantage there. It had less noise being brought out in the blacks and a much smoother looking image than the Canon. But
without question, too.
Yeah, without question. That was a big point Nikon in that aspect. But the problem I had was when looking at the images, even though there was more noise in the shirt, I found after being pumped up, for some reason I found that the overall image was more pleasing from the Canon. Just to look at it, when you're not looking at the noise detail.
Right. When we zoomed out.
When you zoom out and you look at the whole image, the image looked more pleasing from the Canon than it did from the Nikon. So
I'd give the point to the Nikon.
I'd give the point to the Nikon, but if you're just looking at overall pleasingness, from looking at an image, I would give it a point Canon. So doing actual study and test, yes, on paper, point Nikon. Looking at it from just how you relate to the image and like the image, I give it a point Canon.
I'm actually, on this one, this might be the part where we disagree. I'm still going to give the point to Nikon. Next is the bone that Matt has to pick with Nikon. It's the reason we're here. It's the reason we even have both of these cameras and that Matt is even considering jumping. Is that right?
That is the whole reason. I think Nikon has dropped the ball with their color white balance and the screen on this camera. My D3S, I had no problem with it, and I loved the screen on it. I thought it was great. Loved the images, right out of camera when you're looking at them, and on the back of the screen you could be shooting and feeling good about your images. My whole thing is with shooting with this camera, you look at the image on the back and you're like, oh, my white balance is off, and you try to adjust it to fix it, but there is no fix. It is green. You can move away from the greens in your custom white balance and bring it to a bit more magenta to fix it a little bit. Even with that, you still see more green than you see with the Canon. So we did a white balance test on this. In this test, yeah, we did notice that the white balance is far too green with the Nikon. So much so that I'm here considering buying a whole different system of camera.
To me, that sounded somewhat ludicrous. The screen is pretty bad. I wouldn't be happy judging color with it. Sure, maybe we should be using a histogram. Some will argue, yeah, you should be using a histogram, gray card, whatever. Shoot raw, color correct in post. But you know what? They had it right with the D3S. The D3S was a great screen. This is a step backwards for Nikon, unfortunately, and it's a this is
big step backwards. I don't know why they played with it to begin with. You know, they could have made the screen a little larger or done something, but what they've done with this screen is a big step backward for Nikon. And I've heard other people talking on the forums as well, saying it's a deal breaker. In my opinion, it's terrible, and they've dropped the ball big time here.
So the green screen, huge issue for you. Is it big enough an issue to switch, or are you going to stay with Nikon? They're both awesome cameras, but in the end, pick your camera.
I think I'm going to have to go with the Canon 1DX on this one. This is the camera I'm going to be going for. I love the feel of it. It's a solid camera. It's a little bit more solid than the Nikon. I love the screen. I love the wide screen on it. And that fast focusing that I experienced after feeling that, I don't know if I can let that go at this point. So this is my decision.
The 1DX, so there you have it. Neither camera is a terrible camera by any measure. These are the absolute best you can get in SLRs right now. A lot of great things to like about the D4, but at the same time, that one Achilles heel is that white balance and the green screen. And unfortunately, if Nikon's going to deny that, that's a deal breaker for you. So the 1DX it is. Just wanted to point out, if you've noticed or not, our Freedom Culture t-shirts, apparel, and accessories there. Freedom Culture is a new fashion line. It's started by Matthew's partner and wife, Cheryl. It's apparel. It's designed to be stylish apparel that is actually done for a meaningful purpose.
Yeah, so Freedom Culture is a brand that started a few months back where profit sharing is happening with organizations rescuing women and children from the sex trafficking trade. You know, in recent years, you've been hearing more and more, probably on the news and newspapers about sex trafficking. It's a big problem in Canada. It's a big problem in the U.S. and a huge problem in places like Thailand, Cambodia, where 9-10 year olds are sold into sex slavery, servicing 20-30 men a day, which is disgusting that people are made to do this type of thing. When people buy clothing at Freedom Culture, accessories at Freedom Culture, we donate profits from every sale towards organizations helping put an end to this stuff.
Please have a look at www.freedomculture.com
and take a look at the clothes, men's, women's, and more stuff is being added weekly. So check it out, freedomculture.com.
And remember, real men don't buy women.
That's right, real men do not buy women.
We didn't even pay for a model for this shoot today.
Exactly.